Hey folks, Knox with IT Inspired here. Man, we are going to have some fun with this. In a previous series, we went over SQL Server. That was choosing the career path, installing and configuring the SQL instance, basic development and querying, then the administration fundamentals such as backups, user permissions, and migrations. But we didn't touch on the front end of an application, that's like the website itself, and we didn't touch on the cloud at all. So in this video, we are going to build a front-end web app that is going to use a SQL backend. We're going to host it all in the cloud in Azure, and it's going to be free. You heard that right. We're going to do development, SQL, the cloud, all in one video, completely free. So let's get started. Okay, so here's the scenario. I'm going to have a party. I want to have a party, and I need to know who all is going to come to my party. So what I want to do is I'm going to build a super basic website where it's going to have a text box in it. People can go to this website. They'll type their name in the text box. They're going to click submit. And that's how I know who all is coming. When they click submit, it's going to insert their name into a SQL database. So we're going to have this website hosted in Azure as well as the SQL database. And I'm not talking about spinning up a VM, installing IIS or Apache on it, and building a website. No, we're going to have Azure handle all of the server maintenance and all of the hosting itself. We just want them to publish our website. So the first thing we have to do is minimize paint. You can kind of see what's happening here is we're going to do all the development on our desktop or our laptop, whatever you're using. And here's the cloud. You can kind of see how it's going to look. The first thing we got to do is we've got to provision this space in Azure itself. If you didn't watch the previous video on standing up an Azure SQL database and integrating it with Active Directory, don't worry, these steps are almost identical, so we're going to cover them all here. But if you do want to integrate into the Azure Active Directory, we're not going to cover that in this part. You probably do want to circle back to that video and pick it up around the 10-minute mark. Okay, so let's get started. Let's stand up a website and the database connected to it in Azure. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to log into portal.azure.com with the account that you've already created, hopefully, and got the $200 credit. And what we're looking to do here is we're going to build an app service. The app service here means that it is going to be hosting the application itself. And what you're about to see is it's actually overwhelming the amount of options you have. This is one that I've created already. This is kind of the dashboard that you land on if you've already created stuff. But if not, it's going to tell you, hey, this is empty. Let's add some services. So we're going to click Add. And right off the bat, you can see how many options that there are here for many different kinds of services they have. It's not just web apps. If you need to build firewalls, you can actually spin up like Sophos or Palo Alto firewalls in these services. You can spin up business intelligence tools like Grafana here. But what we want to do, like we've already laid out, is we're going to build a web app with SQL attached to it. This is kind of the template for it, and it makes it so easy to deploy this space. So I'm going to click on that, and it's going to say, hey, this is going to be a web app with SQL. That's what we're here to do, right? So I'm going to click Create down here at the bottom. Now, it doesn't actually create it. You got to specify all the info yourself. So let's give this app a name. You can see right below it this .azurewebsites.net. When you do the free tier, you're stuck with that. When you upgrade it to basic or standard or premium, then you can actually map your own public DNS records to this, and it works very seamlessly. Another question that you may have is SSL. How is that handled? With all at .azurewebsites.net, it comes with a wildcard search, so you will automatically have SSL enabled on your app. So let's just call this My Web Form. Oh, that's not available. Let's come up with something else. Let's see. Storm Web Form. Hey, we got the green check mark. That sounds good. Oh, we've already set up a subscription. If you haven't done this yet, you'll have a wizard here available to you to create this subscription. Hopefully you've got the subscription going. There is going to be a resource group. Again, this is very high level. This is just a way to categorize your applications to work together. In a lot of senses, the resource groups share network resources. So, if you have silos for your applications, you might want to decide on putting them into different resource groups. It's not uncommon for the network resources to be in one group and the compute resources to be in a separate group so that teams can manage them independently. But either way, I already do have existing resource groups, and I'm just going to stick with my month of lunches that we've been going with. Now, the next question, you're going to click this button here where it says App Service Plan. And as you can see, I've already selected the free app. You won't have this option. I think it's going to default to standard. So you'll want to click Create New. It's going to ask you for a service plan name. You can just call this My Free Service Plan Name. You're going to click on Pricing Tier. And it's going to bring you to all of these options. So you can see you've got the Dev Test category. You've got Production. And then you've got Isolated. So advanced networking and scale. So fancy. Obviously, we're just trying to cover the basics here. So we're going to go with free. You're going to click on the free tier and then click apply. And when you're done with that, you're just going to click OK. Since I already have a free app tier selected here, I'm just going to make sure that we're going to go with that here. All right, great, cool. The SQL database. So the first question we've done here, we're basically for the web app and setting up kind of some global account-wide items like the subscription and the resource group. The SQL database itself is a little bit more involved. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to be creating a new database. Notice we haven't said anything about the server yet. You can already see here I've already got a couple databases existing, but we're going to be creating a new database for this. So what do we call this? Storm Web Form. So I'll call this Storm Web DB. How about that? Storm Web Database. Now, if you haven't created a SQL Server yet, because you haven't gone through the previous video that we're talking about, you're going to have to create a new SQL Server right here. And that wizard is also pretty straightforward. The server admin login and password, very important that you document that, because that's how you're going to actually log in to this SQL Server so that you can get to your databases. Yeah, so just go through that wizard. I do like the East US location. That tends to be very stable. It's one of the largest data centers. Also, for the paid resources, it's just a little bit cheaper too. So select your SQL Server, and then you're going to also choose a pricing tier. Oops, sorry. Yep, we're going to discard that. You're going to choose the pricing tier, and because we did the web app with SQL, you get advantages to access this free tier. Now notice that's only 32 megabytes of shared storage, so not a whole lot, but again, we're just tinkering with this stuff right now. So go ahead and choose the free tier for your SQL Server. That will be more than sufficient for this database. So to recap, we're going to be creating the Storm Web DB. I've already got Storm AZ SQL created as the server. You're going to go through it and create a server for yourself. Make sure you document those creds. For the pricing tier, go ahead and select the free tier so that you get it for free. The default collation is more than fine. That's fine. So we're going to click apply there. Ooh, it's giving me a little fuss. There we go. And I'm going to choose free tier and hit apply. All right, so one of the things I just realized, the little warning text here is telling me that a free database already exists for the selected region, so the subscription can only have one free database per region. So I have to change the region. I can't go with East US. Let's see what it'll let me do here. Let's create a new database. Let's create a new server. We're going to call this Storm Web. How about that? It'll take it. Yep, that's fine. We're going to give it a login and a password. It's got to be super secure. And let's change the region now to maybe Central US. Let's see if it lets me play with that. All right, we're going to select that, and it likes it. And let's go to the pricing tier, choose free, and apply. Boom, check that out. Now we've got a new SQL Server. You got to see me make one after all, as well as I could select the free tier. So now that I've learned that, you can learn that too. You can only have one free database per region. I am creating this one in the Central US region. So let's hit select. All right, so now we've got a recap for our provision space on this website. We're going to have Storm Web Form, and it's going to be at .azurewebsites.net. The pay-as-you-go subscription. We're going to use the existing resource group. We are choosing the free app plan for the website itself and the SQL database. We are creating the Storm Web DB SQL database, and it's going to be created on a new SQL server. And that is pretty much good to go. I have my username and my password documented. So let's go ahead, click Pin to Dashboard, and create. Now this part does tend to take a few minutes, so I am going to pause it at this time while we wait for this web app to deploy. Okay, and just like that, after just 2 or 3 minutes, it is provisioned. It automatically took me into my website itself. It does have this little pop-up that says go to resource. It would just take you straight here. So this is the web page portion of it. It's not the database portion. The web page portion at this time is almost ready to go, not entirely ready to go. We're going to have a couple tweaks to do to it later, but right now the one thing we really got to get squared away is the SQL database. If you didn't watch the last video, one thing I will point out to you, and if you did watch the last video, is one thing you'll recall, is that SQL databases in Azure are by default set to deny all inbound traffic. So what you have to do is you have to go to it and explicitly tell it, you need to allow my IP inside so that we can administer the SQL database, start building the database out, building the tables inside of it. Now, it is pretty cool that when you did the web app plus SQL, that connection already took place. It's kind of towards the bottom here. Let me see if I can dig it up real quick. Right here towards the bottom under mobile, there is data connections. And this default connection to a SQL database, that's us. That's the one we were trying to get to. So very cool that does exist. So let us get open here. Let's go to SQL databases. And you're going to see the Storm Web DB that I just created. That's the one we want to edit the firewall on. So I'm going to click on that. And then over here, top center, set server firewall. That's the one we want to go after, right? So let's go and click on that. All right, so since this was a new server, it doesn't have any firewall rules yet. These edits right here are actually applied kind of at the server level. So if you create a second database on this server that is in the central US, these rules would already be there. But since it's not, this is the IP address that I'm coming from right now at my house. We're going to go ahead and do add client IP right here at the top. And that's just going to add the rule right there in this place. And if I have any other IP addresses that I want to allow into the SQL, like maybe my office or something, you would go ahead and just manually type them in right here. But now this is done. We're ready. Let's click Save. And it's going to be updating server firewall rules. And just like that, that's done. We're going to hit OK. And we're going to close out of the firewall rules. Now, we need to copy the server name, which there's a little button you can kind of see. It looks like 2 little pages. It's a very universal copy symbol. We're just going to copy that server name. We're going to open SQL Server and just verify that we can connect to it. Sometimes Azure is a little slow, even though it says the configuration is done. It does take a few extra minutes to get to it. So let's go ahead and paste in our server name and go ahead and use that default admin account that we created when we created the SQL Server, right? All right, let's do, and this is going to be SQL Server authentication. So I got to retype that password again. Oh no. Here we go. All right, and I'm going to hit connect. And boom, it let me right in. Excellent. Okay. At this point, we are ready to begin the development itself. Let's expand databases, and look at that. Our Storm Web DB, the database itself, is here, and it is empty. It is ready for us to show them some love. So if you did watch the SQL series, you kind of know what's coming next. We're going to create a table, and then we're going to create the stored procedure that's going to run our application. So you know what? Let's just dive right in. Let's go ahead and create a new table. And it's going to bring up the little GUI wizard item here. Since we're just going to create one text field on our web app, we really only need 2 columns here. If you remember those videos I was talking about, what 2 columns do you think they are? We'll wait. You can pause it. You can think through it. Okay, it's going to be the ID field because we got to have a primary key, right? And we're going to set that to be int for integer. Let's go ahead and back that out. And we're going to go ahead and do the drop down and just scroll right on down to int. We are not going to allow nulls because this is going to be an identity field. Let's expand identity specification. That is going to make this an identity field. And if you just double click on right next to is identity, that'll switch it to yes. It's going to start with the ID of number 1 and increment it 1 at a time. So that's going to make this be an identity field that doesn't make it a primary key. To make it a primary key, we just right-click on this little arrow here and set primary key. That's all there is to making a primary key identity field. So what that essentially means for the people who didn't watch the SQL Server series is we can write data into other columns and it will automatically generate an ID number and increment 1 row at a time. So in this case, we're going to create a column called full name. And let's give it a max of, say, 30 characters. How about that? You know, I don't really see us ever inserting data into this table with nulls, but, you know, whatever. I'm just going to leave this alone at this point. I'm saying this table is good to go. All right, so now that we've got an ID, it's set to the primary key, and then a full name field. Basically, whenever we're going to do is we're going to have the submit button. It's going to insert the full name that they typed in the text box and automatically generate the ID field for each of those records. Very cool. So to actually save this table and make it real, we just click the save button, that old 3.5-inch floppy. Give this table a name. Let's call this TBL for table full name. All right, great. And it's saving to the Azure SQL database. And just like that, it's done. If we give our tables a refresh, there it is. Very cool. We now have a database, a table that is ready to have data written to it. Awesome. Let's close out of that. All right, the next thing we have to do is create the stored procedure that is going to be called to insert the data into the table. So if we just expand stored procedures, you'll see it's empty. So it's under programmability, then stored procedure. I'm just going to right click on stored procedure, new stored procedure. And one of the cool things about Azure databases is it gives you a very pretty template that you can work on. It even tells you this is create a stored procedure template for Azure SQL database. So you could actually put your author name in here, what date you created it, a description of what this does. You get the idea. It's pretty cool that they build this very pretty template for you. All right, so let's give this stored procedure a name. That is going to be DBO dot. Does have to specify a schema, so we're going to stick to the DBO schema, and we'll call this insert full name. Great. All right, and we do have to specify the parameter that's going to be inserted. So it kind of gives you this little template for the parameter here. Not a big deal that we can just overwrite this. We kind of know really all we need to worry about is the name of the parameter and what is the data type of it. So the name of this parameter is going to be full name, and the data type is going to be incar 30, just like we specified in the previous table. Okay, now it's actually going to tell us what do we want this thing to do. We are going to be inserting into the table that was called dbo.table full name. Let's just use IntelliSense there. The column will be full name. The values will be the parameter. And that's all there is to it. This is going to be our stored procedure. All right, so to recap, we're creating a procedure named insert full name. We're going to be having a parameter called full name, where this is what the text box is going to be using to pass that whatever the end user types into that text box, it's going to be passed in to this full name parameter, where it's then going to be inserted into the table using that parameter. Very cool. How do we actually create this thing? We just click the execute button right here. Command completed successfully, and if I refresh the stored procedures, there it is. Do we want to test this out? I think we want to test this out and make sure this stored procedure is going to work. So let's go ahead and close our query and create a new one. To test it, we do have to declare the full name parameter. And I think it was in-car 30, right? Let's set it to something that we can test. Full name equals test. And then execute the stored procedure, DBO, insert full name with the parameter full name. Now, it is giving me an IntelliSense error saying that it can't find the stored procedure named dbo.insert full name, but I'm looking at it right there on the other side of the screen, so I'm guessing this is going to work after all. Ta-da! Let's take a look. As it runs the query. And take a look at that. The store procedure works beautifully. Awesome. Great. So take a look at what we've already been able to accomplish, right? We provisioned a space for a website in Azure. We created the database and the SQL Server for it. We connected to that after we set the firewall rules. We created a table. We created a stored procedure. We executed the stored procedure. That's awesome. The back end of our web app is now done. What we get to do now is the one thing that I haven't taught you guys at all, and that is the front end. So what we have to do that is you need to get an app called Visual Studio. They have Visual Studio Community Edition version 2017. At first glance, you're thinking, well, that's going to be, I'm just going to download it and install it. It's going to be a quick little wizard, and it's going to be like 50 megs or something. It's going to be very small. You're right. The problem is when you launch it for the first time, it's going to ask you, okay, what are all of the modules and tools I need to install to get Visual Studio working? What kind of code are we actually going to be writing? Are we going to be writing websites? Are we going to be building applications for Windows? Are we going to be building, if we are building websites, are they going to be for Windows IIS servers, or are they going to be for Linux servers, maybe Apache or Nginx? You have a lot of options to choose from. So what I'm going to advise that you do is you make sure that you get the ASP.NET frameworks and packages in there. You get the Azure packages and frameworks in there, and you should be good to go with that. I think there is also some SQL extensions that you can get in there, so if you are going to be building more on-premise based SQL Server connections to your web apps, you might want to look into getting that. All in all, it wouldn't surprise me at all if you ended up with somewhere between a 3 and 10 gig download after you've selected those options. So do allot some time for that download and installation. Otherwise, you should be good to go. Okay, once you get that going and you are on this page where you have now opened Visual Studio for the first time, the first thing you want to do immediately is sign into it with the same account that you are administering your Azure account with. So whatever you sign into Azure to create those web apps with, you want to sign into Visual Studio with that account. That is going to make publishing your web application infinitely easier. I promise you, when we get to that stage, you're going to laugh at how easy it is. So do get signed in with your Azure account on Visual Studio 2017. All right, let's get started. Let us build the web app itself. I'm going to go to File, New, and Project. And it's going to ask you, what kind of project is this? Really? Right off the bat, it's already hitting home with what I want to do. We're going to be building an ASP.NET web application. And we can call it Storm Web or something like that. Just something that you can remember it with. And I'm going to tell you right now, don't save this in your profile. Create a folder on the C drive where you can store these apps in. So let's go to, where am I going? C drive. There we go. All right, very cool. I'm just going to create a folder here called like web or something. Let's refresh because sometimes it doesn't show up. And refresh again. There we go. Web select folder. All right, great. Awesome. So it's going to be saving StormWeb in the C:\web folder. All right, what kind of web app are we going to be building here? Stick to MVC. That's pretty well-rounded little app here. I know the temptation is to click on web form because that's what we're trying to build, right? Trust me, go with MVC. It'll make more sense in just a second. And it's going to be creating a little project called StormWeb. Now, these projects can be large. For something as simple as what we're about to do, I bet you the folder that contains all of the work inside of it is going to be over 100 megs just for a simple text box. I know, crazy, but that's what we're looking at. So if you don't have Solution Explorer over here on the right-hand side, you might see it on the left-hand side, or you may actually have to click on View and then click on Solution Explorer to get it to show up at all. You do the most of your work in Visual Studio in the Solution Explorer, and I like to keep it on the right-hand side. You can kind of drag it around, and you can see it's going to offer you these little squares. When you hover your mouse over it, it's going to give you the little outline of where it's going to go. So just go ahead and put it there. This to me makes a lot of sense. Okay, so this is a blank page. By default, it lands on this global ASAX page. That is basically what you're looking at right here. If we were to just do nothing more and click publish, this is the website that you would be getting, and it would be running off this global ASAX page. We're going to be creating a new website. So let's right click on StormWeb here to bring up this menu. And we're going to go down to Add, New Item, and guess, hey, there's that web form we were looking for, right? That's what we want to do. Let's click Add. And it takes us to the overview, kind of the HTML doc for the web form page that we're on now. So if you actually click on web form down here, this does the same thing. It's very common to X out of things. And then you go, oh, I need to get my web form back. So you got to like click off of it and then click back on, and it gets it back. So you're looking at this going like, how am I ever going to visualize what this is going to look like when it's just code? Well, that's what this little design button down here is for. Now we're actually looking at like the preview page, if you will, for the website. It's kind of showing you the body. So what we want to do is we want to expand the toolbox, and it shows you what all kind of stuff we can do here. So it's not a great view. You're kind of like, there's probably ways to work with this a little bit better. But you know, we can make this work since it's so simple. Let's drag label on there. Label is just floating text that sits on the page. And what do we want this to call? We're going to call this type your full name. All right. Very cool. We've got type your full name done. Okay. Now we're going to put a text box right underneath it. So that's going to be your text box. You can see kind of how it's going to start shaping together, right? Type your full name, followed by a text box. And the last thing is we need a button. The button's going to be for submitting. Okay, great. Now, one thing that is important is, you know, I don't want this button to just say button, right? I kind of want it to be, I want it to say submit. So over here, kind of on the right-hand side, the properties are a little hidden. If I expand that, now I can actually play with the actual formatting of the button itself. Text is actually what shows up in the button. So if I change that to submit, click off of it, now look, submit. Same thing with type your full name here. If we want to just kind of highlight it, we can go to properties. Oh, it didn't select the label itself. Let me just back that out real quick. If I just delete it, let's just do label, bring it back. Okay, now we've got label selected. Let's go to properties. We can say type your full name. You can change the font color if you actually expand it. You can actually kind of see. You got all kinds of options. Just type in red or something. It'll make it work. For color, let's do that. Red. There we go. Now see the color is the text. The font color is red. You can adjust the size. You get the idea. There's a lot of things you can do here. Bold, true. Italicized, true. That's fine. Okay, great. That's it. That's properties. Okay, so we now kind of have the outline of what we want the website to look like. The big thing, what is the secret sauce that brings it all together? It's the submit button, right? So if I double click on the submit button, it actually brings up the C# of the submit button. I know you're thinking, whoa, I don't know anything about C#. We covered SQL. Don't worry, this is going to be easy. I'm going to walk you through all of the steps. Just give me 1 second to explain what's going on, one step at a time, and before you know it, we're going to be done. Okay, so the first thing that we have to do is we have to specify that this button is actually going to be used for SQL. And right here, we're just going to press Enter, bring up a new line on line 7, and we're going to say using system.data.SQL client. And one of the big things about C# is all of these lines that we're going to type, pretty much all of these lines, I should say, they all going to end with a semicolon. Otherwise, IntelliSense is going to fuss at you, and you'll see that. It's pretty obvious, okay? All right, so let's skip down to what happens when the button is clicked. And that's what button1_click is all about, and it opens up this little brace, and that is where you put what do you do when the button is clicked. So I'm going to indent down here to make it look nice and pretty. The first thing we want it to do is open a connection to the SQL Server. And to do that, we need to specify what that connection is. So let's go to SQL connection, and we're going to give this connection a name. So in this case, I'm going to call this StormCon. And that's what we're going to use to reference this SQL connection later. Now, what is StormCon? We're going to say equal sign. It is a new SQL connection. We're going to open a parentheses, which when you open a parentheses, Visual Studio automatically closes it for you too. We're also going to open a double quote, which it also closes for you too. Now, inside of this is where you put the SQL Server connection string for that Azure SQL database. Where do you go to get the connection string? Well, it's kind of where you would think. You would go to the SQL Server database, or excuse me, the SQL database in Azure. We happen to already be there from when we set the firewall. And check this out. Right here under connection strings, it says Show Database Connection Strings. I'll click on that. And by default, it gives me this option right here, this big block of text. So if I just click on there once, it'll let me copy it. I'll come right back to Visual Studio, and I'll paste it in there. Now, the big thing you'll notice is your user ID, your username, and your password. You have to specify those yourself. I'm not going to do that right now because I don't want my username and password to be published on the internet. I'll do that. I'll save that for last. I'll drag it off the screen and then save it and close it. But for right now, if you want to go ahead and type in your username and password, that'll save you a headache later. And guess what? Guess what we need to do at the very end of this line? We've got to do the semicolon to close it out. Okay, great. That is the SQL connection. Now we press Enter. We're going to open a new block of braces. I'm going to press Enter again to make it look nice and pretty. All right, now that we've got a SQL connection specified, we need to make a command itself. What command are we going to execute? So for that, we say SQL command, and we're going to give that command a name. Let's just call it insert. Something easy. We're just going to refer to it later as insert. And what is this insert thing that we're talking about? It's a new SQL command. We're going to open and close our braces. We're going to open and close quotes. And guess what? We're going to say execute that stored procedure, which I think we called it insert full name. And we're going to say the parameter is full name. We're gonna, then after this quote, we're going to say comma, and we're going to then specify the connection that we just talked about, StormCon. Great. Of course, close it with a semicolon. Now we're not done. We need to tell Visual Studio where to get the full name from. So on the very next line, we're going to talk about this insert that we just named. This was the name of the SQL command, insert, dot, parameters. This is going to tell it create a parameter. We're going to say add with value. Open your parentheses, open quotes. What is the name of the parameter that we're going to be inserting? Full name. And where do you get the data for that parameter? It's going to be text box 1 right there. That's the first text box that we created. If we had created multiple text boxes, it would just increment them one at a time. Text box 1, text box 2, and so on. But we've only created one text box, so the very first one in there, text box 1, is it. And what is the property in that text box but the text? Then, of course, close it with a semicolon. Now it knows to create the parameter full name from the text that is in text box 1. Lastly, or one of the last things we're going to do to make this thing actually work, is we're going to tell the C# command itself, you're going to open the connection to the SQL Server using StormCon, and then call what's called the method open, of course, a semicolon. You're going to execute this query, which we called insert.execute non-query. I don't know why they call it that. And then lastly, close the connection. And then semicolon. Great. Now, just to make this a little pretty and a little more user-friendly, what I want the website to do is I want it to tell the end user, hey, this succeeded. Great job entering your name. The data was inserted successfully. So up here on page load, this section, that's where we do that. And it's actually a pretty little easy command. We're just going to say if, space, open or parentheses. We're going to say the page dot is postback double equal sign true. Press enter. Open some braces. Press enter again to clean that up. Change label 1's text should be equal, open parentheses, open quotes. Oops, sorry. Open quotes. Great job. Data was inserted. Awesome. So now when they click submit, it's going to let them know, great job, data was inserted. And you know what else I want to do when they click submit? I want the text box to be wiped out. I don't want their name to still be in there after they've typed it out. So to do that, that's going to be the very last thing we want C# to do. So let's say if there was a is postback, open braces, set text box 1's text to be null, which is always double quotes. Great. That looks awesome. That looks like some great C# action. What did I forget? Can you see it on the screen? Does it make your eye twitch? You bet. A semicolon. Yep, so the IntelliSense is happy now, and we have a great little query going here. As I mentioned earlier, you're going to have to set your username and password. Once you've done that, make sure you click the Save button right there, and you'll get the little green lines here saying that this is the most current saved information that you have edited. All right, so I am going to drag this over to the other screen, type in my username and password, click Save, and then close out of this C#. Give me just a second. Okay, so I took care of that little item for the web form C#. We now have the button and our text and everything. Make sure, now you see the little asterisk here right there on webform1.aspx. That means that we haven't clicked Save yet. So if you went to go run this website, it wouldn't work. You would have some problems, okay? All right, so one of the things we can do to debug this and make sure it looks good, we can click on webform1.aspx, and we'll click on IIS Express Google Chrome right here. Oh, you know what? I might have to close out of this first just to be safe. Let's click on it. This is going to bring the debugger up, and it's actually going to run through building this website. You can actually test it out in live and see how things are working. Let's see what it does. Oh no, Chrome script debugging in Visual Studio is enabled. Your application is starting. Hey, look at that. That's looking good. Let's go here and say my test and click submit. Hey, great job. Data was inserted. There were no SQL errors. I think that means it's working. If I come back here and I run this query one more time, my test. Look at that. Isn't that amazing? We just locally created a website and published data to it. Now the last step is to just put it in Azure. Let's just publish it, all right? All right, let's do it. All right, so let's close out of Chrome. That will stop the debugging. Let's just make sure we've got everything saved. And one of the things I am going to do is delete. Well, so here's what I'm going to do. We want, when we go to this Azure website, we want it to default to the webform1.aspx, right? That's what we want it to do. So let me just tell this. What we got to do is we got to go to web config, and we're going to tell it down here in the system.web server what the default page is. So I found this little page where it gives you a configuration sample, the web.config, as you may have noticed. It's in XML. So under the system.web servers, we're just going to copy this little default document block here. We're just going to paste it right here underneath default, or underneath system.web servers. And now we don't want the default value to be home.html. We want it to be webform1.aspx. And one of the nightmare things about XML is it is very frequently cap sensitive, so make sure you get that right. And another thing I'm going to add, just for good measure, right underneath this first files, I'm going to open up this and say clear. And it already knows to do / and close. All right, let's save the web.config and close the web.config. Let's go back to portal.azure.com, and we got to tell Azure to use the webform1.aspx as the default document or the default page. So let's go to App Services. Let's pick on our Storm Web Form. Let's go to Application Settings, kind of dead center there. It's going to load all this stuff. You can kind of see this default documents is where we want it to go, but we're going to give it just a second to load. Okay, that loaded up. So you can see these default documents. Basically what it does is it goes through this list, and the moment it finds one of these and it lands and it succeeds, that's what it defaults your website to. This Azure websites.net, that's what it goes to. We know for a fact that we want to use... Okay, after a refresh, I finally got it to come up. We know for a fact that we want it to use a different default document than anything that's listed here. We want it to use our webform1.aspx document that we created. So I'm just going to manually type right over the top of that one, webform1.aspx, and go right back up to the top here and click Save. So now when a user goes to that website that it created, it should load the webform1.aspx instead of actually having to type /webform1.aspx to get to our site. Okay, coming back on here, the last thing we want to do to polish this up is we are getting rid of this default page. Bye-bye. We're going to click Save. Well, we don't have to click Save. We can just close out of this. All right. It's about time to get this thing going. Let's right-click on the Storm Web and click Build. And it looks like that succeeded. It tells us that one build succeeded. We're going to click on Storm Web. We're going to right-click on Storm Web. We're going to click Publish. And it's going to tell you how do we want to publish this. Well, it's going to be an app service. We're going to choose an existing Azure app service because that was what we provisioned when we originally got started. And since you already signed in to your account, right here, it's going to load all of your info. Pay as you go, check it out. There's a resource group. And there is Storm Web Form right there. You can kind of expand it. If you had deployment slots already created, you'd be able to select those. We don't, so we're just going to click Storm Web Form. Yep. There we go. I had to click off, click back on, and it came up. And that's it. We're going to click OK. And down here, you'll see it's going to be building it and publishing it and going through all of that. We'll give it just a second. And when it's done, it'll actually launch Chrome or whatever your default browser is and show you what it looks like. I'm going to pause it and let it do its thing. And just like that, look at this. stormwebform.azurewebsites.net. Here's your website. Let's see if it works. Heyo, I work. Let's click submit. Boom, great job. Data was inserted. The final test to make sure this works. Oop. We'll do that. Hey, look at that. There it is. Look at what you just accomplished. You created a web form using Visual Studio Code, Visual Studio 2017 Community Edition, excuse me, locally on your machine. We did C#. We created buttons and text boxes. We provisioned space in Azure for free, published to it, inserting into a database. Wow. What a huge accomplishment to do in such a short amount of time. I really hope you guys enjoyed this as much as I did. Get out there and try it out.